Welcome to the So What from BCG, the podcast that explores the big ideas shaping business, the economy, and society. I'm Georgie Frost. In this episode, in today's economy, every company is hunting for growth. But you don't need brand new products or niche markets to find it. A huge untapped opportunity lies in serving half the population better with what you already offer. Closing the women's health gap in the US alone represents a $100 billion opportunity by 2030, while women control an estimated $31.8 trillion in global spending. So how can companies meet those needs in healthcare, at work, and as customers, and turn it into a genuine competitive advantage? Well, joining me is Alex Friedman and Trish Stroman, co-leads of Women's Health at BCG. Welcome to you both. Alex, women account for half of the population. So why don't all businesses then successfully target and serve women with their products or services? And what does success even look like here?
Women's economic power is immense. They control $32 trillion in annual global spending and influence up to 85% of household purchases. Yet most industries still design products for a default male. And why this persists, one is limited sex disaggregated data and R&D pipelines that are oriented around what women actually need. Another is a leadership imbalance. Women hold the minority of CEO roles in healthcare, financial services, and consumer products, despite near parity below that level. And finally, generic marketing and limited inclusion in marketing messages has simply persisted for a long time, and also in product testing. So the result is a structural gap where female consumers have lower satisfaction and loyalty across multiple sectors, which leaves a lot of money on the table. That's an opportunity hiding in plain sight, and a very big one.
Trish?
That's the situation. And if we get it right, there are so many benefits. First, we have healthier women. Second, we have thriving markets across healthcare, across consumer, across tech. Those healthier women stay in the workforce longer through their kind of peak leadership years. And all of that leads to higher productivity and participation rates, lifting the economy.
Why has women's health been underinvested for so long?
Yeah, I've seen lots of numbers, but something like 5% of healthcare VC and PE funding go to women-specific endeavors. And I think the answer is complicated to why. Obviously, cultural issues and taboos are part of it. We don't like to talk about menstruation, fertility, and menopause in particular. We weren't even allowed to say out loud until very recently, certainly not on a podcast like this. There's also big gaps in training. So less than a third of OBGYN residents today get any training on menopause whatsoever. When they do get trained, it's something like one lecture, maybe two. Similarly, Alex pointed to the gaps in research. So women were not even in clinical trials until the 90s. And now, like, less than 10% of funding goes to women's needs. So women are afraid to talk about it. Providers aren't trained on it. We don't have the research base. And all of that collectively hides demand. And it also kind of quells innovation. If you don't know the demand's there, the investors don't look for it, and the innovators don't design for it.
It's clear that the momentum is shifting, but what's caused that, do you think, Alex? What's changed to put this on the business agenda now rather than it just being perhaps a social cause?
Women's health is not yet mainstream on the agenda, but it is accelerating, and we're seeing a lot of signals of interest. Most businesses are early still in this arena, but women's unmet needs are registering as a growth lever for some of them. The primary reason really is economic pull. It's understanding the spending power that female consumers have, the rising discretionary control, and you really can't ignore as a business leader how material this influence is from half the population. Another area that we typically think is putting it on the agenda now is data visibility. So we can now measure the economic and health costs of ignoring women through digital health and telemedicine and wearables, which enable female-specific data and personalized care and really shine a spotlight on this in a data-driven way. Another thing that we talk about sometimes too is just that it feels like we're at a cultural inflection point for some of these topics, which have historically been stigmatized. But as millennials are entering midlife with social media fluency and less stigma around these topics, it's creating more visible demand from a large, loud population who want better.
So just give us an idea then, how big an opportunity is this for businesses and for the wider economy? We threw some figures out earlier, but just spell it out for me. Give me a sense of the scale that's being left on the table today. Alex?
The macro scale is women control $32 trillion in spend, but in healthcare alone in the US, it's over $100 billion opportunity and value creation possible by addressing just 4 areas: menopause, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, and cardiovascular disease. And if you double click into each of those, you can really start to see that a lot of the opportunity lies in core businesses of companies that exist today that are simply overlooking the need from female patients.
Just to give you a sense of the magnitude there, that's something like 4x of those markets today, just using existing standard of care. So if women were only screened and treated with the innovation and technology that we have today, you would have 4x growth across those 4 markets.
So where are the most immediate areas then, Trish, for companies to create value?
Yeah, it's a good question. We talk about taking 3 lenses to this, Georgie. Closest in your core business, what are the specific things in your existing products and offerings that you could do differently for women? So that might be about fit. Is your product sized appropriately for women? It might be about packaging. Does your packaging appeal to women? It could be about access. Is your product or service in the right places for women? It could be about training. You are the people delivering your product or service. This is obviously important in the medical field, trained to deliver it appropriately. That's all around your core offering. Then there's the adjacent part. So what are the wraparound services that you could add to your product, whether it's education or better diagnostics, coaching, or maybe a platform that connects women who are using the product that could enhance use and help you grow demand. And then there's like the much more far out opportunities. So this is around building or acquiring really women's first offerings. So really thinking differently about your business.
Alex, what are the simple ways to scan your own organization for opportunities and what you already do in nearby offerings and in completely new spaces?
Step 1 is really thinking about how does your business address a female audience today. So what is the size and texture of your female footprint, share of customers, revenue, and profit from women? Step 2 is understanding their unmet needs and, really understanding their needs by life stage and demographic group, and understand the barriers, access, awareness, affordability, and representation that prevent them from getting the products and services they need. Once you've looked within to understand where your consumer has unmet needs, you think through how you could possibly address them and prioritize a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pilots, right? You start small, thinking through how do we meet consumer frictions, viably build a business, and feasibly stand something up that gets the consumer what they need in these categories. And of course, as you're doing this inward-facing diagnostic, you're also thinking more broadly about the opportunities externally. As Trish mentioned, what are the adjacent and far out plays that also could be a fit for you to provide value to your consumer?
When you speak to leaders, what are they telling you? Where are they seeing the biggest opportunities? Where are the biggest stumbling blocks for them?
We've been talking to a lot of investors today, and data is one of the things that we've heard a lot of. They don't have, or at least until very recently, haven't had the data to size the markets here. It's one of the things that we've been trying to provide because there's a real gap. So there's not great data on the market size because there's not great sex disaggregated data to understand the burden of disease amongst women, usage of these products, adoption, and it's hard to build an ROI model in this space because of that lack of data. So I think that in particular is something we all need to continue to contribute. A lot of times when there is data, it's sitting within private companies and is not accessible to the market more broadly. So I would say first and foremost, data and awareness are really holding the space back.
I want to focus in on an innovation. So looking ahead, Trish, to the next 3-5 years, which new ideas or technologies feel to you to be most promising? And what real problems do they actually solve for women?
I think from an idea perspective, integrating care for women in midlife is a huge opportunity. And it's not flashy or scientific, but there's real innovation to be done in better meeting the care of women. We've come to use the pediatrics analogy, actually. For a long time, there were just general practitioners, and they treated everyone in the family. And slowly over time, we realized the kids weren't just little people, but they needed their own specialized care. Their bodies work differently, their brains work differently, and they needed more specialized care. We have that vision for women's health as well, and particularly women's health as we age. OBs kind of do that for the reproductive years, but we're missing that later in life. So I think there's huge room to innovate the way care is delivered for women in that time, which involves specialization, but it also involves some of the cool connectivity that Alex was talking about. So how do we bring data from your prescriptions and your over-the-counter purchases and your wearables together to your medical provider who's treating you face-to-face, and then to your digital platforms that are kind of coaching you through the process and through the real life of it. So all of that, maybe that's more than a 3 to 5 year transformation, but I think there's real opportunity for improvement, and we can kind of chip away at that over the next 3 to 5 years. So a service delivery model that is more integrated and starts to bring all the pieces together, I think, is one. Then there's just like cool tech that I think could help a lot. Alzheimer's is really late to be diagnosed in women, yet women are 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients, and we don't really know why. So closing that diagnostic gap could be amazing for women, or at least helpful in a really difficult time. To do that, we don't have great tools today. We're starting to look at blood-based biomarkers and also AI-based screening tools that could put together different data from across the medical record and flag someone at higher risk so that they were screened more carefully. So there, a little bit of science and some AI could make a huge difference. Similarly, osteoporosis. 1 in 2 women over 50 will suffer an osteoporosis-related fracture. Only 10% of women with the fracture will actually get screened after their fracture to see if they have osteoporosis. We have the tools we need today, but they're not getting used. An AI-enabled version of technology that could see that loss of bone density in a simple X-ray is one example of it, another new technology that could be super helpful in women's health.
Beyond healthcare, Trish, which sectors do you think have the most to gain from this?
This goes back to women are half the population, and we haven't met their needs anywhere. So I think there's, lots of opportunity. Consumer certainly is a big one. Women are making the majority of purchasing decisions for households, and there are major satisfaction gaps in the products we have today. So certainly consumer, we've talked about that one. Financial services is another place. Women's rising wealth and have very distinct risk profiles and different life courses than men. And so having products that speak more to women's needs is certainly another big opportunity. And then there are 2, I would say, that are sort of health adjacent. One is around benefits. So I think companies have done a good job in increasingly meeting the needs of women, particularly in their earlier years. So around reproductive health and benefits, parental leave, for example. There's a whole new space around women's health in midlife, whether that's menopause benefits or other workplace interventions. And then last, I would say, is sports and wellness. This is another place where products have been consistently designed for men. So whether that's about fit of apparel or technologies that are based on, a male profile. So lots of room in those spaces.
So, Alex, lots of room. And I sense from listening to you that improvements across the board are required. But are there any areas that are actually doing much better than the others?
Great question. There are some businesses where a female consumer or patient is the primary audience. And in those situations, female consumers and patients are best served and have higher satisfaction. If you look at some of the rising venture-backed, female-led, female-focused health platforms like MIDI Health or Electra, you see a portfolio of offerings that actually address her needs as the primary audience in a way that enables her to best solve her problem versus broader male-focused telehealth platforms that may not do the same. I think there's something to learn from businesses that use female as primary, ring-fence R&D and planning around her needs, build a long-term roadmap to stand up a true portfolio to get her the digital and physical products she needs to solve a problem in a holistic way.
Is there enough investment in this space?
I can't use the words on a podcast to strongly emphasize enough how much there is not enough investment in this space. Just looking at venture and private equity, I think women's health startups raised something like $2.5 billion in 2024, which is only 2 to 3% of health sector deal value. This is true across industries, and there are obviously a lot of underlying drivers for this low funding, as we've discussed: understanding of female needs, representation in venture, representation of founders, and, as Trish mentioned, lack of data in a lot of key areas where evidence-based approaches are needed for funding. Some of the key focus areas that investments should target are bone health, cardiovascular disease in women, midlife primary care models, menopause, fertility, oncology, mental health. The list goes on and on and on, but all of these areas have a very high burden and not a lot of attention, which leaves huge areas of unmet need and untapped demand for future funding.
We've been looking at the data in this space, and it's been interesting to see that exits of women's health companies are of equal or greater value than exits in general healthcare companies. So the companies that make it through are driving kind of same or more value. And those companies tend to be about the same age, women's health companies compared to healthcare companies. It's not that the companies aren't mature enough, and it's not that they're not high enough value. There are just less of them getting pulled through the system due to the lack of funding and all of the other complicated factors that we've talked about. But the value is there to be had.
I want to talk about within companies here. What's the productivity and talent cost when you don't support women, particularly midlife women? And what policies, what support can make the biggest difference?
Yeah, Georgie, I'm so glad you asked this question because we've talked so much about the kind of opportunity on the product and services side, but there is such a high opportunity cost for companies in not helping and supporting their workforce through these issues. So 20% of women either leave or consider leaving their jobs during this time of life due to the difficulty managing symptoms and not being able to show up the way they want to at work. So whether that's brain fog or hot flashes, anxiety, fatigue, all of those are perimenopause and menopause symptoms. And they tend to hit women at the kind of pinnacle of their career. So a company has invested over many years to develop a senior leader. And right at the moment when she's ready to kind of give the most back in the way of productivity, she steps back. And so this is a real issue from a workforce perspective. The estimated costs are almost $2 billion annually in lost productivity just in the U.S. Related to this. So you asked, what can companies do about it? I think we're just on the cusp of figuring this out, of what kind of benefits and other supports can companies put in place. Part of it is just awareness, like being able to talk about what's happening at work, whether that's peer groups or communities that companies facilitate, but also manager education, flexible working models. I've heard of flipping mothers' rooms into just, general health rooms so that you can deal with a hot flash, in private, recover from it, and go back to work, for example. And then there's the benefits side. So making sure health benefits include good access to integrated menopause-related care through midlife.
Alex, what kind of evidence would persuade a cautious CFO or a board that this is worth investing resources in? And over what time should they expect the results? And I guess, how do you measure that as well? Because some of these things are not that easy to measure.
So the first thing that you would use to persuade a CFO is market math and customer ROI. So on the market math piece, really understanding or framing the story that health sector upside is worth $100 billion in 4 therapeutic areas alone, and that value can be captured in the near term. Those estimates are over the next 5 years. From a customer ROI lens, really being able to show that women-first improvements are driving increased dollars to top line and bottom line, as well as customer and patient satisfaction and loyalty. The timeframes that you could expect to see some of the uplift is very near term. For pilots focused on women, you could expect to see quick wins in 6 to 12 months, or maybe larger wins in adjacent or new frontier products and services within a handful of years. The KPIs that we'd recommend looking to are female revenue share and profitability of your female customers and patients, satisfaction by gender, and whether those customers and patients are obviously feeling satisfied by what you're providing, but also whether they're spreading the word to others who may need similar solutions. And also, what is the impact that you're having in a specifically healthcare scenario related to diagnosis and treatment of certain conditions?
So we've discussed the so what. What about the now what, Alex? What is the next immediate steps that CEOs should take today to start that journey?
The first step, we think, is signaling intent really acknowledging that serving women better is not philanthropy, it's a strategic growth engine, and signal the intent for co-creating with women and designing products and services with her in mind, co-creating with female consumers and patients, as we talked about, really involves representation of diversity of women, personalization, so tailoring products and services to distinct life stages that women go through, and having empathy in design, really integrating feedback loops into what you're doing and making sure that you're measuring as you go to know that you're driving impact to your audience. We've seen that if you appoint a sponsor to make women's health a real priority and a growth-facing board KPI, that's a good way to stay accountable and really integrate this into the conversation. And being really focused on near-term impact, looking for signals, minimally viable ways of proving points before making significant investment, and bringing your board along for the ride by sharing as you go.
Alex, Trish, thank you so much, and to you for listening. To learn more about women's health at BCG, follow the links in the show notes.